And then in the petrified forest area, we get images like this. And I'm not sure that I would know that was a burden basket if I hadn't seen it in context in the Membrace pottery. And this is probably a couple hundred years later and a few hundred miles further north. But I think we're looking at roughly the same thing. And then this little thing, which if I remember is only about 8 inches high, I have no idea what that was. This is near Woodruff. If I didn't know about burden baskets. And I think some of the avocationalists recording rock art there were referring to these as UFOs and things like that. Water tower. When you've got no scale like that, it's really hard to tell what it is. And then this is just as simple as it can be. No geometric design on it or anything, but there's the shape and there's the loop on top. Burden basket. It's got 2 little dots on it, right in the middle. The figurines of burden baskets have 2 little holes right there, and that's where the tongue band attached to go around your forehead to carry it. Now this one in Utah gives us a little more clues. It's a different shape than the Membrace ones or the petrified forest ones, but it's giving us a little more clue about the texture with that zigzaggy top on it and the fringe at the bottom. Apache burden baskets that are used today in the girls' puberty ceremony, for example, have that fringe on the bottom. And the Apaches add metal tinkler cones to it. And then we've got a female figure over here on the left wearing her string skirt. So the burden baskets, when there's an association with humans at all in rock art, it's usually with women. And in the Membrace pottery, the burden baskets are always associated with women. And historically, burden baskets are always carried by women. It's something that women make and women use. So I think this is another really ancient complex. It doesn't seem to survive historically in Hopi, but it does strongly with Apache, Tohono Pima, Tarahumara in northern Mexico, women in burden baskets, and of course on the Great Plains as well. So here's another little mystery like that, and I'm going to start with the rock art. The eye is immediately drawn to the lizard-like figure, but what's this over here? This scattering of rectangles. And this is the kind of thing that becomes a Rorschach test for everybody who's out there trying to record these things. But it must be the map of the village with the keeper right in the middle of the plaza. It must be a constellation. It's got to be astronomical. I know it's astronomical. And then you can go on and on and on. But I'm going to just give you my version. And all of those could be right. But let's look for those dotted squares in other contexts. And here's one from Wapaki. And the square shape is a clue. So what medium that might be. And we go to Chaco and a surprising number of other sites around the Colorado Plateau have tie-dyed textiles with little squares with a dot in the middle. And Lori Webster and Polly Shaftsman and I just published an article on this in the journal Kiva last year. But I hope you can see these little squares, little dotted squares in diagonal rows. And we get that design on pottery, the dotted square design. And we get that design in murals, and now I've got the context. Because these textiles are shown on people. And they're shown on both women and men. So here it is on a female figure, a tie-dye dress. Or at least some kind of resist dye pattern that could be painted on in that tie-dye pattern. And we've got it on male figures wearing kilts, as well as female figures wearing dresses. And these are from a site near Albuquerque that was excavated by Frank Hibben in the 1960s. And these are his reconstructions of those Kiva murals. And this shows textiles hanging around the Kiva walls, just like Zuni people hang textiles in their kivas today and in their houses when shalako is being performed. So you've got some painted textiles with pottery-like designs, and then these black and white resist dye ones. And now I can take a dot pattern like this in petrified forest rock art, where I've got 2 rows of dots making an interlocking fret, and I can say, I think I'm looking at a depiction of a tie-dye textile. It could still be a constellation, it could still be a kill tally, but it's consistent with the patterning of those little squared dots. And then Laurie Webster decided to go a little further afield. What's the distribution of tie-dye and resist dye techniques that use this dotted square pattern? And it first shows up in the Wari area of South America between 8,500 and 800. Really elaborate stuff, but notice the juxtaposition of the little tiny dotted squares in rows and then the big honking ones, and just the way it's arranged is kind of interesting. And then in the historic period when the Aztecs were writing their books together with Spaniards to try to remember their civilization as the Spaniards took over, they talked a lot about tribute and which areas gave tribute into the Aztec capital, of Tenochtitlan. And many of the tribes to the north in the former Toltec area gave tie-dye textiles that were blue and white. And they drew pictures of them. And here you've got rows of little, double rows of little dotted squares and then this big square in the middle. And these were only worn by Aztec royalty. So they were made as tribute in an outlying area. But once they got to the capital, only royal individuals were allowed to wear these cloaks. So this suggests to Laurie and me, I'm not saying we've proved it by any means, but we do have a lot of evidence for movement up the coast from South America to West Mexico at this point, in the time period in question. Copper metallurgy was brought that way, and shells, spondylus shells, were going the other way, down into South America. And it could be that this technique diffused that way. It could be an independent invention as well. And it sounds like there may be some specialization in the Toltec area of this kind of technique that could then have diffused in the Chaco era up to the southwest where we are now. And it doesn't seem to mean royalty or elites in our context up here. This pattern gets interpreted as corn up here, where it also diffuses into the Maya area, and they tend to interpret it as reptile skin. But there are also some minor references in that area to corn. So we can put together some really obscure patterns in our rock art up here into some really large, significant patterns that may or may not turn out to be true and interesting. Then my last example is one that everybody always wants me to talk about, so I'm just going to toss it in, and that's Coco Kelley. A lot of people, when they think about rock art in the Southwest, think about Coco Kelley because that is the image that has been commercialized. And this is a tongue-in-cheek little book that you can buy about the commercialization of this image. And I want you to just look at the shape of this, because we're going to come back around on this particular image. He's bent over, but it's not a humpback. Has not got a giant penis. He's wearing a kilt, one of those fabric wraps around the hips that we saw in the Kiva murals, and he's got this wild hair. Okay.